Good morning, Scott here, known as Cantaloupe to some online, and I'm bringing a subject to you that's interesting to me. It might be of interest to you or someone you know. And I want to talk about the masculine archetype with emphasis on a specific historical example from the entertainment business. You've probably heard of the band, the famous rock band, The Doors from the 70s, who were not completely unique in embodying the male archetype. The feared male archetype. Now, let me explain what I mean exactly. There are attitudes towards masculinity, to say the least. Maybe that's obvious, but what may not be obvious is how feared it is. Over the years, it has been feared and repressed and suppressed because, in fairness, the unrestrained male can be a little intimidating. The unrestrained, fully testosteronized male is a bit intense, isn't he? So we live in a matriarchy. It's fair to say that we have a great deal of female and maternal influence in our policy making. And over the years, this has been to the advantage and defense and protection of women in general, with some trade-offs. Now, here's the point. There's a limit, of course, to how far you can suppress something that is natural and called for, especially when it is not always terrible. But back to my example of The Doors. I want to talk about Jim Morrison. If you know anything about The Doors, he was the front man, the singer, songwriter. Basically, he was The Doors along with his instrumentation, but he took it way too far. And he made a bad example out of masculinity beyond a point he did. At first, The Doors were wildly popular. They took off pretty quick. They were a very influential, high-profile and popular band, and their music, much of it is very good, very, very good to this day. Classic rock stuff that you probably won't be disappointed if you check it out. However, if you pay close attention to the lyrics, there are some subjects that are brought up by Mr. Morrison that are questionable. They are undoubtedly and obviously from the perspective of the male archetype. They are wild, they are crazy, they are unhinged many times. They are drug-fueled and they are unapologetic, which perhaps contributed to his early death. I want to say that certain people, once they rise to a certain level of visibility, if they begin rocking the boat, so to speak, especially if it's something that is perceived as dangerous itself or precipitating danger on behalf of people who don't fully understand the message, that person is in danger of being removed, right? And because it becomes unsupportable. He definitely crossed the line. This is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the line that Jim Morrison and other rock stars and male archetypes cross sometimes. So I mentioned drug-fueled. I'm sure the dude did a lot of drugs, but that wasn't probably his biggest problem. His biggest problem was, not surprisingly, alcohol, which is a drug. It's just another drug, really. And in fact, historically, in the early 20th century, it was made illegal. It was voted out as a toxic substance that could not be supported in the United States. Of course, we could not enforce it. The prohibition was repealed, and eventually it became legal again. But this is just one thing that makes it even more dangerous because people think maybe it's safe because it's legal. I wanted to just remind everybody, as an aside, it was made illegal for a reason, and the fact that it was made legal wasn't because it was safe. This is a fact. It's because we could not enforce it. Something to keep in mind. So anyway, back to Jim Morrison. In the recording studio, I have actually paid some attention to early recordings of his work actually behind the scenes, recording albums, and the man was just sloshed out of his head most of the time. He would come in, give everybody a hard time, and it was a very difficult situation, hard to work with, I imagine, for the studio producers and his bandmates. However, like I said, I think alcohol was his undoing. I think that if it weren't for alcohol, he would have stuck to his message because it began, if you believe it or not, with a bit of spirituality. It did. Jim Morrison began as a very spiritual person, which unfortunately goes in one of two directions for many people. And in his case, he finally gave up. If you listen to his messages later in life when he finally threw in the towel, so to speak, and just started drinking heavily and being ornery and nasty to everybody, and his message just took a dive, his attitude took a dive. If you listen to what he was actually saying, he was very disappointed with life, with economics, with people in general. He was just a sad, angry, bitter man. And it's at this point, I think, where you can predict that people are about to move on to the next plane, so to speak, in one way or another. You can't have somebody high profile like that sending out a message to everybody, all the youth of the world, who is going to tell them to do things that are going to harm themselves. That wouldn't be supportable, would it? That's what happened in the case of Jim Morrison, and I think that it was because of alcohol. He lost his mind. That's what I think. Prove me wrong. But as far as the male archetype, last thing I'll say about it, it's not all bad. It's actually a sign of strength if you can impulse control, if you can control yourself and choose what to indulge. Right now, here's the key. Here's the key. The male archetype, as wild and intimidating as it can be, when combined with impulse control, when combined with sobriety and an ability to choose what to indulge, becomes indispensable. You need this. Eventually, without it, everything falls apart. And I don't have time in this video to explain why that is. You can just think about it, trust it, whatever you want to do, but it's true. Reach out with questions or comments to whitehotrobot@gmail.com. Thank you.